yourself. First, we'll have Michael Paul Williams introduce himself. Like, so Michael Paul, will you just tell us a little bit about yourself, and what you do at RTD, and we'll use Richmond Times Dispatch, and yeah, and then we can go from there.
All right. Hi, everyone. Mike Williams, Richmond Times Dispatch. I'm a columnist with the newspaper and been doing that since 1992. Um, 39 years in at the Richmond Times Dispatch. I've covered a variety of things, including Richmond city government. Um, it's good to be here.
Thank you. And then we'll have Stephanie go next.
Sorry. Hi, everybody. My name is Stephanie Garrelis. I'm a senior editor and writer at the Griot. I've been there for over a year now. And what I do is that, we try to amplify Black stories that is happening, that is not really covered in the mainstream media. We want to be able to we do have to reflect what is happening in our community, but we don't want to just focus simply on the trauma aspect of everything. We do try to do uplifting stories. We do like positive, because I feel as though Black people, we are more than just our trauma. And what I want to do in my capacity is to kind of show both sides. I feel as though oftentimes you see on the news, like Black Lives Matter is so very, very important, but we also have to highlight the joy. And I always try to seek that in what I'm doing. And I'm glad that I can be a part of this panel with everybody tonight.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Hazel, do you want to introduce yourself?
I do. Good evening, everyone. I'm Hazel Trice Edney. I am editor-in-chief of the Trice Edney Newswire, president CEO of Trice Edney Communications. Richmond is home for me, at least journalistically. I was born at the Richmond Afro-American, and worked there for 4.5 years, and then went over to help Mr. Boone start the Richmond Free Press. I was his first reporter, in fact, his first employee there, and then King Jeremy, etc. And so I'm happy to be with you all tonight. I'm still with the Black Press. I own a newswire now. I call it, it's sort of like a Black Associated Press, and we can talk more about that later.
Awesome. That's really awesome. I'm so excited to get to know you more. And then Jared Carter, will have you introduce yourself next.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Jared Carter Sr. I'm the founding editor of the HBCU Digest. Been in business for the better part of 11 years now, and we offer exclusive coverage of historically Black colleges and universities nationwide. And we're also the proprietors of the HBCU Digest Awards, which recognizes HBCU excellence across academics, leadership, athletics, community service, teaching and learning. So in a nutshell, that's me.
Thank you so much. And last but definitely not least, Bridgette Robertson, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. I'm Bridgette Robertson. I'm an associate professor at the Virginia State University. I work in the Department of Mass Communications. I've been at the university for quite some time. I'm a tenured professor in the department. My background is HBC. I got my journalism, mass communications degree from Norfolk State, my master's of education from Virginia State, and a PhD in communications from Howard, quite a few years in industry. And I am really grateful that you all asked me to be a part of the panel. So thank you.
That's an incredible background. And we're so excited to have you, Bridgette. Thank you so much. So we'll go ahead and get started. Our first question is for Hazel. So Hazel, can you tell me, how would you describe the role Black publications played in informing the Black community, and then also cultivating Black reporters and editors going back to the 1800s and through the Civil Rights era?
Well, in 1827, we got started at the beginning when Freedom's Journal came on the scene. It was because they said, we wish to plead our own cause, for too long have others spoken for us. Black newspapers at that time, or the one Black newspaper at that time, came on the scene because they wanted to stand for themselves. You had a group of Black men. I believe that there were women in there too, but the history doesn't tell about the women. But anyway, they came together in a home and decided that the rest of the country needed to be free. These were free Black people, and they were Black people in New York City at that time. the number of slaves, the number of free Blacks were predominantly in New York City. I believe that today, the Black press stands for the same thing. We still wish to plead our own cause. Others speaking for us, that's fine. It's great. As I said to the Richmond Association of Black Journalists around 2001 or 2002, when Michael Paul Williams was president, and I came back to speak. It's great to be. We need Black people everywhere, and it's great to be at the New York Times, as in the Richmond Times Dispatches, etc. But being in the Black press is at least for me, is a calling, because it is Black owned, and there's nobody that can say, no, you cannot print that, no, you cannot write that. And that's why the Black press, the Black owned media, is so important for me.
I really appreciate that answer a lot, because I think oftentimes when we talk about I think the Black press can be an afterthought, which it shouldn't be, because I think the Richmond Free Press here in Richmond is just as important as the Times Dispatch. It still plays, a really incredible role. I could go on about that for days. I'm going to let my colleague Wayne talk and ask his question.
Kind of off that, Hazel, I heard you kind of say, what was the role of the Free Press in Richmond specifically, played for the Black community in Richmond with the history of that paper?
Well, when Mr. Boone was my, he was my mentor before I ever met him. Okay, when I was at the Afro, I would read an editor called Ray Boone, and he was long gone, but I would go in the back rooms and dust off those newspapers. And so when he called me and told me that he had been reading me as well, I knew all about what he was about. And so when he asked me to come to work for the Richmond Free Press, I knew that the Richmond Free Press, as he said, was a stone's throw across the street from the Richmond Times Dispatch. And that's what we did. We wanted to make sure that the Richmond Times Dispatch and the white-owned media was treating people fairly. One of the most important headlines that I remember, or pictures on the front page of the Richmond Free Press, was Michael Paul Williams picketing the Richmond Times Dispatch. I'll never forget it. It was on the front page of the Richmond Free Press. But also what we did a lot of was we printed those stories that the Times Dispatch refused to print. When the Confederate flag was being emblazoned on the airplanes and uniforms of the Virginia Air National Guard, the Richmond Times Dispatch refused to print it. We put it on the front page, and Governor L. Douglas Wilder immediately commanded them to change it to the flag of the United States of America. And I can name story after story after story that we wrote that led the way. Wendy's had fired 3 nursing students who had braids. And, the minute we wrote the story, the New York Times picked it up the same week, and they had to reverse that policy, the no braids policy at Wendy's. And so that is what the Black press quintessentially does. It's a watchdog. It watches the backs of Black people to make sure that we are treated fairly. And we desire and we fight for change in public policy wherever we can when it's unfair to African Americans.
As someone who works at the RTD right now, I cover education at the RTD, and I'm sure this is an organization that endorsed the Massive Resistance, which was the campaign in Virginia to not allow white kids and Black students to go to school together. And I think about that a lot, like very often. I think some of the stories that you just told are very, very insightful. I really appreciate that. And I have so many more questions I want to ask, and I can't formulate yet, but I will. I just think that history of the Free Press is so, I didn't know it went that deeply, because it was founded in 92. It's not a very old paper.
No, it's not an old paper. newspaper. It was founded in 1992. Mr. Boone was editor and of the Richmond Afro-American, but then he went to work at Howard University and lived in Baltimore for many years. And then he decided that he was going to start his own newspaper. And that was the Richmond Free Press. Yeah, and I can't tell you the impact that the Free Press has made over the years, even since I've gone. You know, they have continued to fight for justice on behalf of Black people, making sure that African American reporters are able to cover and photographers are able to cover in the Virginia Supreme Court, you know, et cetera. There's just so many accomplishments, and then so many accomplishments yet to be had across the nation by Black newspapers. There's so much injustice still out there that only we will fight.
I really appreciate that insight, Hazel. So I want to go to Michael Paul Williams next, since Michael Paul is a columnist at the RTD here in Richmond. Michael Paul, I'm wondering, just one, I'm very curious about the story of you picketing the RTD one, and then second, but then second, I mean. And if you want to talk about that, Michael Paul, you can. If you don't, that's fine. But I wonder, like, how do you view your role, you know, as a columnist in today's environment that we're in now?
Well, two things. The picket, I wasn't personally picketing the Times-Dispatch. I was president of Richmond Newspapers Professional Association, our union. And our union was picketing the newspaper on its anniversary, its 150th, I believe, anniversary, because we didn't have a contract. And obviously, they're not going to cover that story. And I was extremely grateful to the Richmond Free Press for covering that story and putting us on the front page. And because it's about workers' rights, really. And you know, the Black press is about workers and common people and just folks who are oppressed corporately. And so we really appreciated support there. I guess to kind of explain my role at the paper, I'd have to do the origin story, which was back in 1991, when the Richmond News Leader, our sister paper, the evening paper, was going out of business, and we were all told to reapply for our jobs. I walked into my editor's office and told him, look, we have people writing opinions all over the newspaper, and none of them look like me, think like me. And you need to hire a commentator, an opinion writer of color. And I've earned this, I can do this, and you know I can do this, but if you don't let me do it, you need to get someone who can. And to my shock, they took me up on it. And that's how that happened. And it really kind of the mission to give voice and the sort of perspectives to the newspaper that historically were ignored, and sometimes still are, was kind of came with the job description. It's you know, we kind of have a cross to bear working in the white-owned mainstream media. Especially a paper with the troubled legacy of the Richmond Times-Dispatch, where, you know, I'd go out on a story and I'd be out there with Hazel at a crusade meeting or whatnot and tell them, well, I'm with the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and it quickly would become, oh, you mean the Richmond Times-Disgrace? And you know, you probably could still get that. It's better. I mean, but that back in the 1980s, oh, that's how they knew us. You know, the history was still pretty immediate and raw. So, you know, we need a Black press, and probably we'll always need a Black press, because come on, look around you, look at what's going on. You know, how much has changed? A lot's changed, but a lot's still the same, and some of it seems worse. The Black press is liberated from the audience considerations that the white-owned media have. They don't have people writing, like at the Times-Dispatch, writing the editors and people who run the Times-Dispatch and the publishers saying, I'm canceling my subscription because of Michael Paul Williams' column. who are not willing to suffer a Black point of view. That's pressure. I mean, look at the newspaper business. The newspaper business is struggling all over, and the Times-Dispatch is no different. And those pressures are felt. And the Black press has its own economic pressures, but I don't think there are pressures where white folks are writing them and saying, we don't want your point of view, because you know what you're getting. So we're always going to need that liberated, empowering voice, independent from corporations that have conflicted interests.
I appreciate that, Michael Paul. Wayne, do you want to ask your question?
Yes. Well, you obviously, all your columns are very thoroughly reported as well. So how do you, when kind of displaying the pain, how do you weigh objectivity versus fairness and versus, what you're trying to say in a particular column?
How do I weigh it? Columns are inherently subjective. I mean, it's an opinion. So, no worries there. I always strive to be fair. And I think facts are the foundation of fairness. I'm trying not to come off half cocked and just write something that I'm pulling out of my, what. I want to be able to support it. So if I can build that column on a foundation of facts, it will be inherently fair.
Thank you, Michael Paul. I want to go to Stephanie. Stephanie, I keep changing my question for you because I was very intrigued by your pinned tweet about the work you did at the GRIO regarding Meghan Markle and how she was covered in the UK. I'm wondering, would you be able to tell us some about that?
Yeah, so as you know, Michael was saying that sometimes we need that Black perspective. And what I haven't liked about the coverage of Meghan Markle is the fact that for me, I was just watching it as Stephanie. My father had died in April 2018. And so I saw this royal wedding and I wanted some escapism. That's all that I had wanted. But I have two identities. I'm a Black woman, I'm a journalist. So those two identities always kind of coexist. And from the very beginning, I noticed how the narratives were starting to how you notice like subtle things and somebody who is white doesn't pick it up automatically, but we see it. And I said, let me just watch this. And it kept going and going. And all of a sudden, when she announced that she was pregnant, it just seemed as though all the pretense ended and all the like xenophobia, the racism came out. And every time that somebody would speak about Meghan Markle, it would be predominantly white people. It was predominantly white males, white women. And people kept saying, well, it's just something that she did. There's just something about her. I just don't like it. It gave me flashbacks, President Obama, Michelle Obama. And I kept saying, well, you know what? I only have my Twitter. I only have my platform. I'm going to keep speaking out on it. I'm going to speak out on it every single day. And it wasn't like until maybe 2019. And she said, nobody asked me, am I okay? You need to see a woman of color cry on TV for you to understand the impact this negativity is having. And there was one thing that really disturbed me because, I wasn't the only Black woman that saw this. It was a lot of Black men and women of color who were pointing this out. But a white reporter at BuzzFeed, she took all the stuff that we had combined in the past 3 years, she slapped her name on it. And then everybody was like, oh, wow, I can't believe Meghan Markle was treated this way. And for a Black reporter, it was sort of like, it was another slap in the face. Yes, I'm happy that, the racism is being amplified, but why did it take a white woman reporter for you to take this seriously? And all this stuff that has been happening. And the fact is that, Piers Morgan blocked me. I take that as a badge of honor. But the thing is that I knew what was going on. As a Black woman, I knew what was going on. And I felt that more people need to kind of speak up. And that's kind of like the problem. We don't have Black voices and perspective, like what Mr. Williams was saying. You know what? You may not want to suffer a Black reporter, a Black columnist, but we have a certain perspective and a vantage board that you don't want to see. And additionally, not even just Meghan Markle, but the whole thing with President Donald Trump. Many of us called it from the very beginning, this man is a xenophobe, he is a racist. This is not something to play around with. And everybody kept saying, well, you know what, you're just biased. You just don't want to give him a chance. But when you're in a predominantly white newsroom, of course you see these white supremacists as people in your family. You don't see people like me who are the target of these white supremacists. And just going back even earlier to President Barack Obama, when, it became in trend to hire Black reporters because, we're going to have a Black president in the White House. And everybody kept saying, well, we have a new post-racial America. That's news to me. I mean, it's really how it's amazing how, we had a post-racial America and all the racial violence kind of like ratcheted up during, President Obama's presidency. It's not that we had a post-racial America. It's the fact that, it triggered something in people. They just couldn't contain it, because you don't go from Obama to Trump without something in the environment already being there. And everybody keeps acting, this is not America. This is America. And Black journalists have been saying from the very beginning, but we're often called biased, we're not objective. The thing is that we see things more clear than most people. And I feel as though if you believe that you have a platform, and if you only have 10 followers, keep speaking to those 10 followers, because it will grow. And eventually, it'll become gentrified, but the message will be out there.
Definitely, and kind of off that, what we're, in this political environment and social environment, also just you could say social media environment as well, just how fast information travels. What role do Black media outlets play in this environment? Presenting that perspective, trying to maybe cut through some of the other things that are out there.
I know that, in my opinion, I believe that social media has been the great equalizer. Social media does the most, but I feel as though because of social media, we have a platform that you may not want. There was the Daily Beast did not want to publish an article that I write about Meghan Markle, because in their opinion, can we just take race out of it? And I felt, okay, that's interesting. But because I have my own platform, I'm going to put it on there. People are going to go see what I want to hear, what I have to say. I feel as though we have utilized social media to a great, great power, utilizing power. We can call to arms, well, not physical, violence or anything like that, but, a call to action that people can be mobilized, that we can, like Black Lives Matter, Trayvon Martin dying. It took a month for George Zimmerman to be arrested. And you know why he was finally arrested? It's because we applied pressure on social media. Unfortunately, he wasn't convicted, but we have used social media to amplify our voices. And I believe that if social media weren't around, as Malcolm X would say, that, these newspapers would allow our oppressors, to make it seem as though they're the victims and we're the ones who are causing all the mayhem.
Thank you so much. I think that was so insightful. I want to go to Jarrett next, founder of HBCU Digest. Well, first of all, I just want to ask how you decided to start HBCU Digest. But then I also want to ask, how do HBCUs contribute to, I guess, the diversification of newsrooms by preparing the next generation of journalists, but also how an HBCU graduate can also contribute to the Black press as well.
I think simply I just started it because there was a void of higher education coverage that was focused on HBCUs. It's difficult to consider higher education from an equity standpoint and not consider HBCUs, where you're talking about an industry and a culture that is generally to serve the affluent. And HBCUs have carved out this niche where, we're going to focus on poor folks, poor Black people, and not only do that, but then thriving doing that and create a Black middle class and create a Black political class and create a Black industrial movement. So if you consider all of those things have genesis in the HBCU and in larger part the Black church, then you know why that's so important from levels far beyond education. But I think in terms of diversity, I think the HBCU by its nature is encouraging its students to think beyond, telling a story that is authentic to Black people. They're encouraging students to think beyond, this is how you get over racism and mistreatment in the newsroom. You can be more than just somebody who diversifies a newsroom. You can be somebody who is a representative for your community. And that is especially true in social media now. I think in a lot of ways, Black media is thriving, not necessarily because publications are thriving, but because Black people have realized their power and autonomy as reporters on social media. So if you were to consolidate all of our eyewitness accounts of police brutality, all of our depictions and all of our storytelling of Black excellence from levels low and high, if you think about the ways that we are on scene eyewitnesses to things that are happening in industry, talking about discrimination, but also talking about elevation, of certain Black voices and Black people, Black media is thriving. We just don't concentrate it in a bureau. We just don't concentrate it in a publication, but it's alive and it's doing its thing. And so HBCUs, I think, to the point that they are providing the training that gives people the journalistic ethics to say, here's how that story can be further distilled. Here's a way that we can get to the heart of some of the issues that a lot of brothers and sisters are saying on social media. I think that's their call in the journalistic respect, but also to think about it more than just you're a dot in the newsroom. You can be somebody who can be entrepreneurial and who can galvanize storytelling and amplify that in a unique way.
Kind of preparing journalists for the field, HBCUs, what do you think, schools should be teaching future journalists that you're positive they aren't right now? What role can, HBCUs play in preparing, the next generation of Black journalists?
That's a really good question. I would say it's telling the truth, even if it's uncomfortable. I think that part of the struggle of quote unquote Black media is that we're supposed to tell a specific kind of story. We're supposed to say what the white man won't say or what won't happen. But if you start to talk about accountability in some respect, then we become the enemy. Right. It was, part of one of the most difficult stretches of my career happened over a 6-year period. The last 2 years of the Obama administration, where we started talking about, we got some problems here in terms of support from the federal levels for HBCUs. And then the next 4 years where it's like, wait a minute, there's a whole bunch of support coming to HBCUs from this dude who's a racist. And so telling that true story, I did, and a lot of other folks took a bunch of arrows to be able to say that. Now, luckily, we had data to back up what we were saying, and you had the voices of HBCU presidents to back up what we were saying, and you had people in Congressional Black Caucus who, in some part, were backing up what we were saying. But it was the difficulty in getting a layperson audience to recognize that. And so I think that the call, and I'm sure Dr. Robertson can speak to this, is getting young people who are coming into an industry who feel like we have a burden to be Black AF in everything we say and do. And you should be that. But if you are true to your ethics and true to your training, Black AF should come out in your authenticity and how you tell the story, not necessarily how Black the message is or how Black the theme would be, but that you are reporting truth and fact within a broader context of, what does this mean to a Black community? What does this mean to a Black person? What does this mean to a Black infrastructure? And so I would hope that as many strong HBCU mass comm and journalism programs as we have around the country, that is what is going on. And that's not that the resource question, the resource challenge isn't, kind of breaking up that objective or kind of watering it down, so to speak.
Thank you so much. And I think that's a good segue into my next question for Bridgette. Bridgette, I wanted to ask you, what is your number one goal in preparing your students for the industry?
Let me just say, Stephanie, I feel your emotion, and that's amazing because that's exactly where Black journalists are today. Jared, you're on target. Let me just say that for me as a professor, it's kind of a struggle to answer that question. Your number one priority for preparing students for the industry. And I say that because we're in a different day. We're in a different time. When I came through the industry, and I got to say it hasn't been that long ago, but when I came through the industry, it was all about being objective. You were taught to stay in line, be objective. But today we're facing so much more. I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We've seen protests, police brutality. So we're really emotional today. So Black journalists are human. They're human. You can't separate that emotion from being objective. So it's really difficult to be 100% objective. The subjectivity comes into play a lot today. And sometimes it takes over, and it's totally acceptable. as far as I'm concerned as a professor today. If I look back, when we look back in history, just like Hazel said that in so many words, the Black press is what brought social injustices to mainstream America. We reset the conversation. We reset the stage in terms of race. We showed it all. That was our job. And it still is today. It's just more intensified. The interesting thing is that we see so much more of it today. And in our current circumstances, we're much more emotional. And the interesting thing is today, Black journalists, as far as I'm concerned, almost have to pick a side, and that's where we are. You almost have to pick a side with your journalism while maintaining objectivity, social responsibility as well. So it is a tough situation today. So my conversation to you is that in terms of how do we prepare Black journalists today? Remain objective, but also keep fighting to balance that social responsibility and this objectivity, because that's our history. We are to bring those injustices and what we see to the mainstream, and sometimes we're not able to separate how we feel about it personally, and that's what I teach my students.
Thank you so much.
And I wanted to ask as well, obviously it's important for students to see examples in the field. Who are maybe some of the Black journalists out there that you think?
Wait,
I'm
yeah. Sorry. Can I dovetail off what Bridgette just said regarding the objectivity piece?
Definitely.
Objectivity has been damaging to journalism. The notion of objectivity that's been held in journalism. We should strive to be accurate and we should strive to be fair, but there's no objectivity in covering civil rights movement where Black people are being brutalized. And there's no objectivity in covering a president like Donald Trump who lied every time he opened his mouth. And the habitual kind of tick to be fair and balanced in the name of objectivity was extremely damaging in calling out the lie and giving our readers the truth that they needed. And it's only recently if the Trump presidency has done anything, it has pushed us out of that habit of repeating the lie unchallenged and in the name of objectivity. So the reality is the white press and the white media for so long was not objective. They were utterly subjective. They were performing an act of advocacy on behalf of white people. So the whole idea of objectivity and this lack of bias has been a fallacy. I mean, pretty much like the notion of meritocracy in America. So just had to get that off my chest. Sorry.
And may I add to that? I mean, I absolutely agree. I also teach. I'm an adjunct professor at the Kathy Hughes School of Communications at Howard University. And right now I teach multicultural media history. I've taught just about every journalism class there. And I do not teach objectivity. I teach fairness. When I see when I see George Floyd, when a police officer is kneeling on his neck, what is objective about that? Death is death to Black people, and we must speak truth, regardless of what the journalistic rules are. And if you just follow the facts, it's going to take you to the same place anyway. It's wrong and it's unjust. And so I teach students that one of the greatest attacks on Black people in this country has been the attacks on our mind, how we are afraid and how we are afraid to speak truth. We are tied to certain parties or certain ideologies just because it might put a little money in our pocket. But the greatest gift that a journalist can have is independent thinking, and particularly a Black journalist, is to be able to think for themselves and to think freely without being afraid, and just without being thinking that they're going to lose something if they speak this truth to power.
I think like go ahead, Bridget. I'm sorry.
And Hazel, that's absolutely right. One of the things that I teach students as well is that don't be afraid. If you're going to offend someone, you absolutely mean to do it. Say what you mean what you say, and just be strong about it and deal with it. Don't be afraid to not step outside of the box and take a stand for what you believe in, and that comes through the journalism today, and that's really important. I know that in some of our classes we even get the discussing about how do I handle police when they stop me. I mean, this is a journalism class. We even get to that in the classroom. So those discussions do come out. And it's important. It's important for them to stand up for what they believe in, and to decide what kind of journalist do I want to be today? How do I want to be remembered? Because honestly, in this industry, and you all know, wherever you go, that reputation will follow you. So it's important that they stand strong and believe in themselves, and definitely believe in their work. And that's very important.
I wanted to add, like, I think as I work on weighing objectivity and fairness, like Hazel said, I think one of the things that I think about is who are people versus institutions is one thing I often think about as I cover schools. I think about like a parent who is upset with a school system, and is it necessarily fair for me to put them on the same playing field as a $340 million school system? And same thing with Black folks and the police. Is it fair for me to put their family on the same playing field as 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 a centuries old institution? I think that's often how I weigh fairness versus objectivity. And is it necessarily fair to be objective in a space, and especially in the climate that we're in now? I know it wasn't my turn. I think it was Wayne's turn. I am so sorry, Wayne.
No problem. I saw Jared, you had your hand raised. I don't know. I want to make sure I didn't miss you if you wanted to add to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, what everybody's saying is true, but I think in journalism, particularly when you consider what makes the business, what opens the doors, and what keeps the doors open, you always have somebody to whom you're going to report. So when we're saying, don't be afraid to offend, that can hurt you. I mean, I know what it's like when you lose a bunch of followers because you take a stand. And not necessarily in the name of journalism, but necessarily for us, I think as Black reporters, for us who saying, Black folks need to know this, whether they like it or not. And more often than not, they don't like it. So they don't like you being the one who's saying, you're just saying what the white man's going to say anyway. So that's a tough call. But then the other part of that is, and all of us who are reporters have talked to community leaders and institutional leaders. And in the back of our mind, every time we report, every time we write a column, we're thinking about, how is this going to affect that community? How is that going to affect that congregation? How is that going to affect that neighborhood, all at the same time? Right. So when we talk about objectivity, I can tell you from my perspective, every time I write, I got to think about 100 schools at the same damn time. I could be talking about agricultural schools and what a research institution is going to say. I could be talking about, a Fisk University, a school with less than 1,000 students. Well, what is A&T going to say with 12,000? Because when people look at it, and let me tell you another secret. A whole bunch of white folks read Black media, right? A whole bunch of white folks read the HBCU Digest. Do not be fooled. And a whole bunch of white folks that make decisions read the HBCU Digest. And so I got to think about that. How are they going to interpret what I'm saying when I know what I'm doing is for Black folks to read between the lines? So I can't even overtly report, or I can't even overtly opine on some of the things for the fear of other people who read it, who control money and control systems, might take that the wrong way. So objectivity is key in some perspectives when you think about to whom we have to answer.
Jared, someone in the chat asked, how do you balance that with some schools who are very image conscious? I'm not sure what schools they're talking about. I have an idea, but I'm not sure which ones. I don't want to assume.
I think you just have to have a very open conversation with it. And I think a lot of us who have been in positions where we're reporting and, particularly in editorial writing, you got to have a conversation, say, brother, sister, I got to do it. Now, what I like to have is your perspective on this so I can counterbalance whatever is coming. But you need to know that if your school has a problem with sexual harassment and assault, that's the story. I can't cover that up and I can't ignore it. Or if your school has a problem with, misogyny in the way that faculty are being treated or in the way that people are being promoted at the school, I can't help you. That's your fault. But what I can do is try to communicate that you intend to do something about it, that you recognize that it's there. That's what I mean, the objectivity, because the worst thing I think Black media can do is, in the name of Black preservation or being a good brother or being a good sister, is ignore a problem. That's not what we're here to do. We're not here to preserve Blackness by saying our issues ain't going to get out there. So that's the way I see it. But I know I'm in a very niche area of journalism covering higher education, but I think that it could be a universal point for all.
Mm-hmm.
Jared, you speak to a very strong point when you say you could be threatened by who you work for. You made that point. You have to, and that's what I tell my students as well. I tell them, when you get ready to take on a job, when you get ready to take on a role, you need to know who you're working for. And because unfortunately, it could play a big role in how you present the stories you want to tell. And that's very, very key today, unfortunately. So, the Black journalists really have, and, they have to be strong on so many levels today, because that could definitely interfere with you being as fair as you want to be. It could be devastating financially if you were to step on somebody's toes. So, while this is a very sensitive issue, is very important to understand that in the industry.
And also to piggyback off what Jared said, because I agree completely, especially what Tori just said in the messages. We're not here to be PR for the Black race. We are still journalists. And I think one of the main issues that has come up in recent years is the issue of Bill Cosby. I know that for me, I went to Temple University. When I was at Temple, it was around 2007. I honestly had no idea. I thought he was still normal Bill Cosby. And so when these allegations came out, everybody was saying, well, you can't do that. You can't talk about it because, he gives Temple University so much money. So everybody be quiet. And the story comes back again, maybe 10 years later with the comedian Burgess Jenkins. I can't think of his name right, but you guys know who I'm talking about. And so he said, yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much. And he says, well, you're giving me a hard time, and Bill Cosby's a rapist. So the story blows up again. And so in the Black press is like, we have a responsibility to put the story out there. But so many in our audience say, well, how dare you take down a Black icon? Don't you know he was trying to buy NBC? What's the matter with you? And it's like, this is not about taking down one of our icons. It's about holding him accountable. We can't turn a blind eye to what is happening in our community because we're afraid that white people are going to talk about us. What about the danger that exists in people who are being harmed by the behavior if we don't call it out? So I definitely want to give you a hand clap. Thank you so very much for saying that. And for Bridgette as well. She said, I like what you said as well. Just wanted to put that out there.
I think that we promote the idea that Black folks are invincible if we reduce or if we kind of minimize the authentic and true reporting, right? Because there's already a problem that we have. Black folks are super Negroes in reporting, in life, in everything. Like you're either Barack Obama or you're Lil Uzi Vert, and there's nothing in between. And so if you're not excellent, then you're an enemy. And so I think that the goal of the Black press is to say Barack Obama and Lil Uzi Vert have value, and they have challenges, and they do things that lift us up, and they do things that take us down. And you decide as a reader what role that plays in your life. Like, we can't, you can't look at it and say, we're the protector of Black culture, and then say the things that you screw up. That don't count that out. Don't count that. And Bill Cosby's excellent point. In the HBCU community, we didn't know what to do about his money coming to Spelman. That was a huge question. That was an unpopular topic. And eventually Spelman returned the money. But the issue was, how are we supposed to navigate this? What do we do when two things are true at once? He's a record-breaking philanthropist and he's a rapist.
Do you know what prompted Spelman to decide to send the money back? Was it organizers? Was it what was it? Just random.
From my conversations with some of the folks there, it was conversations on the board. It was conversations with the students but the Spelman community was talking about what message does it send to Black women, to women at large, to be an institution that is the citadel for Black women in industry, to say, we'll keep your money if these allegations have been proven true. I think that as lasting as the legacy of the gift was, keeping it would have created a new legacy of what you're willing to tolerate and what you're willing to accept and for what cost. And that's not a cost they were willing to pay. So, but they didn't talk a lot about that publicly. They just kind of gave it back and said it is what it is. But those are some of the considerations you got to make.
I appreciate that. I did want to get back to Bridgette. I think it was Wayne's turn though. I did want to, because we're asking everybody 2 questions. Maybe I'm too stuck on the script. I don't know. But Wayne, do you want to go ahead and ask Bridgette your second question?
Yes, I was curious, Bridgette, too, who are maybe some of the examples in the field right now that maybe you use with your students, or just in general that you think are good examples for kind of up and coming Black journalists, people who are doing it a way that you think that maybe young journalists could aspire to?
And again, these are tough questions for me as a professor, because I don't want, just to kind of like, this person's good, because one of the things I try to tell students, find a good fit, find someone out there that you think fit your style, your personality, and then make it your own. I tell students that. But if I did have to say, and again, I don't want to kind of paint attitudes here, but if I did have to say, I think Abby Phillips with CNN, I think she does a really good job. I think she's come through the ranks. She's shown who she is. I think she's got a really strong personality. I have to say Frederica Whitfield, because she's a Howard alum. And I think she's got a good balance there. And she really kind of, she's thorough in terms of her journalism and reporting. And she seems to be unwavering as to who she is and what she shows herself. In terms of locally, honestly, we've got some really great anchors and reporters. Diane, I see you here as well. I think you really are a really strong icon. My niece, I think she's somewhere on here tonight. She says, "Oh, Diane's here." So you're very well recognized. I don't want to paint attitudes or anything, but I think Kenya and Wayne, I've read your stuff. I think you are clear and to the point. And Kenya as a political reporter, Wayne as a sports reporter. I do know that I watch Jasmine Turner a lot. I think she's a good, honest reporter. If that honesty piece in there in terms of balance and fairness. And then I'm going to throw a wrench in this whole thing. And I'm going to say Harris Faulkner. She's got a tough role on Fox News. I'm going to throw a wrench in it. She's African-American and she's in a tough role. I find sometimes that she do call people out, even though we don't always want to admit, on certain stations or whatever, but a lot of times we have to. So we have to give credit where credit is due. So that's where I am. And if I offended anybody, I do apologize. But one thing I tell students to do is to find that person that you think's a good fit for you. and you kind of take their personality and their style and you make it their own. When I was coming through the industry, there were certain people that I watched every single day to pick up on their style and the way that they handled their public speaking and that kind of thing. So I think that's really good. And I'll stop there.
No, I really appreciate that. One question that I wanted to ask the whole panel. I know a lot of times when we talk about Black reporters, there's the role of the Black press, which offers more freedom to be able to tell it like it is. Whereas for Black reporters who are in the white press, we try to balance telling the truth while also not wanting to lose our jobs. And so I wanted to ask the whole panel, like, do you think it is possible for Black reporters and journalists at white-owned publications to fight from within? I know some people don't think that that's possible. Sometimes I wonder myself, is it possible? But do you think that is a possibility for Black reporters and journalists to fight from within a white-owned institution? And if some of y'all aren't comfortable answering that, that's fine too.
I'm very comfortable in answering it for obvious reason. I do believe that is possible. Michael Paul Williams just stated that he was not necessarily representing himself personally when he picketed the Richmond Times-Dispatch, but he was representing justice through their union. There are many ways that it can be done, especially if you have that, that kind of protection. And I believe, and I know that, that he and others also have the courage that if they didn't have that kind of covering, they would still speak truth to that power. And so that is what it requires. It requires courage. It requires, as I would tell my students, it requires the courage to walk away. If the issue means that much to you, if it means more to you than your, if it means more to you than your money, you've got to walk away, because your integrity is everything, and integrity is everything for a journalist. And so how are you going to sit at the table and allow someone to pull your purse strings and tell you not to tell the truth, or won't allow you to tell the truth? That's the way I see it.
May I say something? I'm not on the panel. I'm
ER ship.
How are you doing, Hazel?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm great. For sure, you can fight from within, and I'm an example of that. My first real job in journalism was at the New York Times, and I got there in 1980, which is ancient history for many of you. The New York Times had just settled a lawsuit that had been brought by women. They were in the middle of a lawsuit that had been brought by Black and Latino people. I got there and I continued what I'd done in college. If I see injustice, I'm out there speaking up. So from the beginning, I was speaking up at the New York Times and continued doing so for the 13 years that I was there. And what was interesting is that many of the things we were demanding then in the 1980s are only now seeming to really come to fruition. When we see Black people being elevated to managing editor and executive editor at some of the major publications, when we see journalists being assigned to the most prestigious beats, yes, from White House to Homeland Security to, you name it now, foreign correspondence. We were demanding all of those things. Those did not exist as options for most Black journalists, even at the top newspapers like a New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, et cetera. So you have to fight the battles. And then when you're tired, you have to say, I'm out of here. And I did that after 13 years. I said, I'm out of here. And I actually said something, I think to the NABJ Journal or something like, people thought it was weird that you would leave the top job in journalism or top publication in journalism at the time. And I thought, no, there is life beyond the plantation. And the publisher was a little rattled by my having said that the place was a plantation, but it was, and it was sort of run that way. But I never would bite my tongue, and I still don't. But I think it takes some courage. It may take some being crazy and just oblivious to some things. But in the end, you can live with yourself, and you can hope that the fighting that you did is going to help pave the way for those who come after you.
Absolutely.
And let me tell you how crazy that is, because Professor Shipp won a Pulitzer. So if you got somebody who won a Pulitzer Prize fed up with the mess, what does that say about the journalist that's entry level trying to break through on, as Professor Shipp said, a city hall beat, right, or municipal affairs? If she is feeling the heat, what is a younger journalist feeling, right? So I think it comes down to what kind of fight do you want to have, and are you comfortable with the results of that fight not coming during your time at the organization? Because it'll just change after you leave.
I think our presence in these organizations historically and still today is in itself an act of resistance.
Mhm.
And every battle we fight, and we've all fought them, and we'll keep fighting them, won't be over the placement of a story or what story not to do or what story not to do or this or that. The resistance can be in the form of what we cover and how we choose to cover it, and the stories we see that would have gone unseen if we weren't there. So we're fighting every day,
Right.
in ways big and small.
If I can add something to this, and I don't know if you all were going to ask this question or not, I think it's also important that we continue to pull people up in those positions when we leave, and we mentor them so they can take on those roles and be just as strong as we were when we leave the space. So I think that's very important as well.
Yeah, so
And
that
we kind
rolls
of do
into-
that.
oh,
We
sorry.
kind of do that through NABJ and the mentoring programs that come out of there. The now there's more attention to self-care, something that we didn't pay too much attention to a decade or so ago. But I think we are doing a better job of reaching the next generations and being there to provide some guidance or support, but not standing in their way.
Yeah, that kind of rolls right into one of our other questions. Just how can those already in the industry kind of contribute to diversifying newsrooms? And kind of bringing along those people where they're already at.
You know what? I can kind of speak to that, and it's weird because I don't work in a predominantly white newsroom. But I tell you, one of the things that I actively do on a regular basis, particularly for those journalists, those white journalists who cover higher education, I specifically point them to Black experts, Black story topics, and Black writers from where they can get expertise in coverage or ideas for coverage, not so it can be pilfered, but so that those writers can be sourced and be cited in other work, and so white folks can be clear on some of the stories that where we may need some amplification, right? Because I think that we're starting to turn a quarter where I think a lot of publications are realizing Black people buy newspapers too, and we get on the internet and click on stuff like everybody else. And so they are starting to realize like maybe there is something to catering to a Black audience segment authentically rather than just antagonizing them and making Black folks hate the publication. They are realizing there's some value in telling their story. But then you got to worry if they're going to tell it correctly. So I think that Black journalists, we got to give all our power to the folks that are in there and make sure they have all the access and all the insight that they can get. If they're calling us, we can't be slow to pick up the phone and reply. And we got to make sure that other folks in other publications are citing their work so they can start to blip more on the radar as somebody who's being widely read outside of their community or even outside of that industry.
May I make a comment?
Go ahead, Tori.
Okay, so to answer, I can't remember who asked that question. Mentorship is great, but I think one issue is that the Black press doesn't get enough support financially. I've been a newspaper reporter for almost 20 years, and almost every city I lived in had a Black newspaper, but they get fewer advertisements, they have fewer subscriptions, and they get a lot of criticism. They're not doing this, they're not there, they're not covering this event. Well, do you have a subscription? Do you support it? Do you read it? They can't hire and they can't expand if they don't have the money to pay people, to pay staff. So I think that's a critical thing. The Black press has been ahead of its time, ahead of journalism in so many areas. The civil rights movement, that was the Black press. That was Ebony, that was Jet, that was local newspapers. That was not the New York Times. They came on later. And I think they don't get, the Black press does not get the respect it deserves in both the support and in staffing. They have trained a lot of the best and the brightest who left, obviously. You have financial considerations, you got to eat, but I just don't think the Black press gets the support it deserves and that it has earned.
That's absolutely true. One of the things I said just today on a panel that the Black press really should file a class action lawsuit against the federal government, just like the Black farmers did, because the federal government does not advertise with the Black press. It's not just, I'm not talking about the Democrats and Republicans, et cetera. I'm talking about the federal government. All of those agencies across the board should be advertising in the Black press, should be allowing us to carry the ball. And I hate to use the word allow. It's just that it's something that we have earned. We have established these Black newspapers. We speak to a specific audience, and there is a reason that they don't advertise with us on the same level as they do with the white-owned newspapers. And that reason, I believe, is just specifically race. It's because they look down upon anything that is Black. And I believe that we ought to come together, folks, who are the Black journalists, the Black newspapers in specific, Black-owned newspapers, and file that class action lawsuit. And I believe we would win.
To Tori's point and to Hazel's point, this should be our moment. I mean, we're in this so-called moment of reckoning on race, where everybody's about, or a lot of people are about, Black lives mattering. Well, Black businesses should matter too, and Black media should matter, and Black press should matter. Much of what Black people in journalism and the Black press has written has come to pass. We were issuing warnings that went unheeded, and here we are. And we have been truth tellers against power for so long, and this should be recognized, and this should be in our moment. If we're about social justice in so many ways, and it seems to be happening in so many ways politically and law enforcement and so forth and so on, I don't think you can leave the media out of it. So
Also,
this should be our moment.
I'm sorry, I would like to add to what Ms. Edney and Mr. Williams just said, that I'll file that class action lawsuit with you. And also, in regards to the Black press, I feel as though some of our icons could do a better job of acknowledging us. As somebody said in the chat, it's hard for us to get, interviews with a lot of these Black celebrities. When a lot of these Black celebrities want to get on, they come to the Black press to kind of like, get interest in them. As soon as they blow up, it's as if we're dirt on the bottom of their shoes. And I don't think that's fair. I'm not saying that, your career is beholden to us, but don't forget where you come from, because there's going to come a point where you're going to need the Black press to have your back. Let's look at Janet Jackson, Justin Timberlake. Back then it was predominantly, white male reporters framing that narrative around that whole situation. Now we're in 2021, and you have Janet Jackson belatedly getting a weak apology from Justin Timberlake, because we have come to a time in society that we can finally hold him accountable. And it's like, well, I'm really sorry for what I did 20 years ago. Okay, let's get over it. But the thing is that this woman, this icon, Janet Jackson, she was blackballed. She was blackballed for an entire generation does not know that Janet Jackson is the blueprint. She is the blueprint, and an entire generation does not know that because she was blackballed, and a lot of Black reporters weren't given that outlet to kind of say that. There were a lot of us screaming it out loud, but we were not given the platform. And I feel as though it's starting to change a little bit, but I feel as though a lot of Black artists can kind of say that, you know what, I'm going to talk to People Magazine, but I'm going to talk to the Griot. I'm going to talk to BET. I'm going to talk to The Root. You know, treat us like we matter.
I really appreciate that. I wanted to ask a question that someone asked in the chat, and it was, you know, should Black journalists see themselves as Black journalists or journalists who happen to be Black who bring a very different experience to the craft?
How can we set something aside that is so essential to our being? I mean, how can I take my Blackness off, implying my profession when Blackness is so determinate and so essential to the rest of my life? That doesn't seem plausible to me. And part of the reason I went into this business was to make it a better place, a more responsive place for the Black readership and Black community. So I'm a Black reporter. I'm a Black columnist.
Black journalist.
Black journalist. You can put that in front of pretty much anything I do.
Yeah.
And in fact, you know, if the people doing the hiring are true to what they mean by diversity, we shouldn't have to be having the conversation about whether we're Black or journalists. It's the diversity, it's what we bring in terms of our experiences that's going to enhance that news operations. So we shouldn't have to leave behind anything. All that we are is going to inform the kind of journalism that we can produce.
And I don't think in most ways we can help it. No matter what kind of press conference, no matter what kind of crime scene, no matter what kind of school board meeting or sporting event, you're not just carrying, you know, your training as a journalist, you're carrying the memories and the DNA of your family, where you grew up and everything. So every time you see something, you're thinking in your mind, you know, a set of questions that will communicate a story, but you also think, well, what would my grandmama and them want to know? What would my dad want to know about this situation? And that's inherent to you. And so you frame your questions, you frame your writing, the organization of your story, the way you pursue sources in the tradition, in a lot of ways. Not just the tradition of journalism, but the tradition of your community. You can't help who you are. So you're practicing journalism in your Blackness. It just, I don't think you can do anything about that unless you try to suppress it. And I don't think anybody wants to do that. But I think no matter what you do, you are speaking and inquiring on behalf of a community. And it comes out in your reporting, it comes out in your product.
I could think of an ESPN anchor woman who tries, but you won't get that.
And I can think of a brother on ESPN who goes in overdrive with it. But but what I'm saying is you can't help it. It is what it is.
We're telling stories from the Black perspective. So that's what it is.
Right.
You are a Black journalist. I
remember the advent of social media, 1991, when Rodney King was beaten. And it was just all over the news because that was like the first videotape, other than during the civil rights movement, of a Black man being beaten by police in the streets. And I just remembered that before that, at the Afro-American newspaper, I mean, there were pictures of people with black eyes that I would put, or the editor would put on the front page of the black newspapers. And so before Rodney King, before the CNNs, before the advent of the cell phone video, we were fighting this specific cause and never, I don't want to say we were never recognized for it, but even now it's like it seems to be forgotten. And I spoke of Ray Boone, my mentor, my father in the Black press. I should also give respect to Gene Boone, who is now the publisher of the Richmond Free Press. And I do that with all honor, because oftentimes even women are not given the just due, the Ida B. Wells, etc. They're not given their just due, those who led the way. And so there's so much more injustice out there for us to uncover. As Mr. Boone said, the story of Black people has yet to be told.
Hazel, you just hit on a great marketing campaign for the Black press. I mean, we were the cell phone video before you had one.
but see that speaks to a larger point. And Kenya actually said this at the beginning of this conversation. Where's the responsibility of our coalition and our institutions, right? So I hear a lot from NABJ about newsroom diversity, and I see that when we respond to bad things happening in newsrooms, and I see, we don't challenge corporations or the Fortune 500. Where's your advertising into Black press? Where's your, what is the state of independently Black owned media? We keep thinking about, go in there, and the best thing that we can do is send Black folks in there. Well, what are we doing, coalition wise, to build up what we got out here? Right? Like, those are, if you want to be what you really want to be, you wouldn't worry about getting into another place. You would try to establish your station. But that only happens if we build coalition. So if NNPA and all these other organizations are saying, if we get together and approach corporate America to say, here's the audience that we reach, here's the influence that we have, you ought to invest in that. Instead, we're thinking about the one or two or three of us that can get in the newsroom. I'm not sure if that's the most effective thing that you could do. One, to build wealth in your community. One, two, to create jobs, and three, to tell a holistic story.
I appreciate all of you all saying that. I think a good question to end on as you talk about the state of the Black press. I want to know what all of our panelists think. What is the state of the Black press right now? Where do you all think the Black press is as we stand here at 8:14 on February 24th, 2021?
The Black press is still, as the film said, soldiers without swords. We're still fighting. We're still fighting, in fact, the Double V campaign. Victory against fascism abroad, victory against racism and white supremacy at home. We're still fighting. And we do it whether we get that federal dollar or not. We do it whether we get that advertising campaign or not. Democrat, Republican, if they don't spend money with us, we're still going to fight nevertheless. And we continue to speak truth to power no matter what color power is. Because it's nice to have a business and it's nice to be prosperous, but we don't do it for money. We do this because it is justice. We do this because this is America, the country that our Black people built. We built it physically and we built it emotionally. We built it legally in the Supreme Courts. We built this country. And so we're not going to drop it just because of a dime.
Well, Hazel, wouldn't you acknowledge, though, that not all Black publishers are pursuing the noble aims you have described? There are some who are not willing to take on the issues they could take on in their communities because they are afraid of losing what income is coming in from advertising and from readers. So I think that we have a noble tradition, but I think there are quite a few examples of people not adhering to that.
I'm sure they're out there somewhere, ER, but they are not the majority. And the majority, at least the ones that I know, the ones who subscribe to my newswire and who stand with NNPA, and others outside of organizations are taking the risk, and they're speaking for justice regardless.
Maybe at least one answer is we see journalism moving toward more philanthropic models and less business oriented, less publicly owned, less Wall Street models that create inherent conflicts. Maybe that's the answer for the Black press too. We've got Black folks with a lot of money.
I would also say, like, the Mississippi Mass Choir, we're not tired yet. We've been at the forefront for so long, seeing all this trauma and pain, and we're still here. And we're here because we care. We care about the next generation that's coming up. Because for me, I shouldn't still be fighting the battles that should have already been won, but here I am, and I want to stand in the gap for the next people coming up. I'm going to pass you the baton. I'm going to be an old lady at Shady Pines, still tweeting about, hey, this is wrong, Black Lives Matter, while like my daughter is like, yeah, that's right, but you heard my mom, Black lives do matter. The thing is that we're not tired yet. It's in my blood. I feel like for Black journalists, it's in our blood, because if we're only doing this for money, a lot of us would have checked out already.
Oh,
and the thing is that I was out of a full-time job for 7 years, and they did not want to give me a job. But here I am. I'm not going anywhere. I'm still going to be here. I'm still getting on your nerves. And I'm still going to let you know that Black lives do matter. Our lives do matter. And Black journalists are here to tell our story.
Could I say something? I just saw somebody come up, Monty Young from Newsday. He just spoke to us that this is a great panel. Monty Young was it the Times Dispatch or the News Leader? But anyway, he was the person who sat with me when I first came to the Richmond Afro-American. He was with either the Times Dispatch or Richmond News Leader. And he sat with me and told me what I needed to know as a journalist. And I thought about him earlier in this panel, and largely because of him, I sit here today. Although he was with the other newspaper, largely because of him, I sit here today, because he took the time to pour into me and to teach me and to tell me, you need to get in there, you need to ask questions, this is who you need to know. And that's what we need to do with young people, with younger people, and that will also bring some people up in the Black press and in media overall.
One of the things that was told to me when I first got in the industry was, don't forget to pull somebody else up. That was the first thing that I was told when I was hired. And I was doing some work at WRVA radio in Richmond as a news reporter and that was the first thing that I still remember it today. So, while some aren't listening, we are making a difference. So that one story is getting out there and changing people's minds and changing people's perspective, and we're still resetting the conversation. So that's what I want to say with regards to that question.
When I arrived at the Times Dispatch back in 1982, Monty Young and Bonnie Winston, who's now the editor at the Richmond Free Press, were there, and it was not a friendly environment, and it gave me tremendous comfort to have Monty and Bonnie there, knowing that they had my back. Monty probably could do a panel on this by himself. I mean, the stories he could tell about back in the day. But I mean, look at where Monty is now. I mean, it's inspirational, and he stayed in the game, and I'm sure it hasn't been easy. But I mean, we're all a fraternity and a sorority here. There's nothing like it. I mean, I could name every Black journalist I ever worked with, and it's a tremendous thing.
I would just recap what I said at the beginning. I think the art and science of Black journalism is thriving. You know, a police shooting in Richmond at 8:30 tonight could be in LA and could be trending in LA within the hour. Or a kid being suspended in Miami could be in New York within minutes. Could be a trending story in New York within minutes. And that's because of Black people on social media creating content, driving feedback, making local and national outlets react to what Black Twitter does. You know, so that in itself, just the art and science of it, it's in a very good place. But I think that we have to define it by how far we are from where we want to be. Do we want sprawling news operations? You know, do we want a Huffington Post? Do we want the Grio to be as big as the New York Times with international bureaus? Or are we saying we want to be more effective at what we're doing right now? And so, you know, I think that if we can step outside of frames of predominantly or traditionally white institutions and say, this is how we plead our cause, you know, to kick off with Ms. Hazel said, it doesn't necessarily mean that we scale up. It just means that we do more of what we've been doing, and that Black folks can make a living doing it, and that we can harness, you know, the collective talent on Black Twitter and the collective talent coming out of J schools and HBCUs, and that we can harness partnership with Black legislators at state and municipal and federal levels, and we're all working together as an ecosystem. If that to me would be the utopia for Black media. Everybody's together in the same ecosystem, and I think we're a little bit out from that, but we don't have to be so far because we're also more interconnected than we used to be.
Well, I am just incredibly grateful for what we did today. I think, yeah, I think those are all the questions that we have for everyone. Everyone, I just want to thank you all for coming, and all the panelists. Thank you all so much for just being a part of this, our Black History Month program. And Wayne, do you have any parting words before we get off?
Yeah, just again, thank you to all the panelists for your time. Thank you for all the attendees for joining as well. We really appreciate the support. So again, this was kind of our first big event since we've been trying to restart RABJ. So I'm very excited about how this went. Really enjoyed this discussion, and stay tuned for more programming from us for sure.
Thank you for
For
being
sure.
here.
Follow us
I
on
just
Twitter.
wanted to thank Hazel and Mike for those kind words. It's good to see Tori, my colleague at Newsday. And Ms. Shipp doesn't know me, but I have followed her career. I know a great deal about her work and the great things that she's done. I'll leave you guys with one thing. When I first came to Newsday, I would go to Les Payne and I would complain about, you covering Long Island, white folks saying all kind of crazy stuff. And I would complain and complain. He just pulled out this drawer of it must have been 10,000 letters in this drawer. And all of them were nasty and all of them were using the N-word. And I just remember what he always told me. As a journalist, Black journalist, tell the truth and duck.
Well, yeah, thank y'all so much. Everyone, feel free to follow NABJ, our Richmond Association of Black Journalists on Twitter. We're at NABJRVA. Always feel free to email us if you're interested in membership. We're at rabjinfo@gmail.com, and we are looking for leadership. That's what we're looking for right now. We're looking for leadership. So, if you are interested, please let me or Wayne know. And we're really trying to get this going. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
God bless
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Been wonderful. Thank you.